Deconverted Man here, and today I'm going to be looking at a video called The Laws of Info Prove God Exists. Before I begin my analysis of this video, I would like, if I could, to read to you this passage from Critiques of God, edited by Peter A. Angelis. This is page 101, by Michael Scriven, and I can't pronounce anybody's name right. And this is the paragraph that I want to read here. Suppose someone replies that theism is a kind of belief that does not need justification by evidence. This either means that no one cares whether it's correct or not, that there's some other way of checking that it is correct besides looking at the evidence for it, that is, giving reasons for believing it. But the first alternative is false, since very many people care whether there is a God or not. And the second alternative is false because any method of showing that belief is likely to be true is, by definition, a justification of that belief, that is, an appeal to reason. You certainly cannot show that a belief in God is likely to be true just by having confidence in it and saying that this is a case of knowledge based on faith, any more than you can win a game just by playing it and calling that winning. The reason I've read to you that paragraph is that the author there is describing for us essentially three different logical fallacies that somebody can and people do commit when they try to argue for God. If they're just saying, well, just believe in God because believe in it. And how do I know that there's a God? Because I believe in it. It's circular reasoning. It's special pleading. And its special knowledge claim. I know that there's a God. Or the special claim that I know what you know. I know that you believe in God. And the circular reasoning, I know it because I know it. That is not logical. That is fallacious. So this video does all three of those logical fallacies. Let's look at it.
One of the things that you'll notice that Jesus never did, I'm not kidding, he never did this. He never went about the business of proving God. That's right. He never, like the rest of the Bible, said, okay, let me try to persuade you that God exists. In other words, he was a presuppositionalist.
We now have an additional three logical fallacies on top of the three logical fallacies I already have mentioned. The circular argumentation, the appeal to special knowledge, and the appeal to special pleading, is adding on appeal to authority, appeal to religion, and appeal to doctrine. The appeal to authority is appealing to what Jesus, a authority figure, at least for some people, thinks or says. The appeal to religion because we're using a religious book. And then the appeal to doctrine because we have to believe that this doctrine of this particular individual is correct. There's many ways to interpret the things that Jesus was supposedly did or said. You could look at the different Gospels and make the case that Jesus was trying to prove that there was a God. In fact, you could make the case that everything Jesus was doing was trying to prove that there was a God. So there's 6 total logical fallacies, and we haven't even gotten to the argumentation that is going to prove that there's a God yet. But let's see what he gives us.
He knew what Romans 1 said. Everybody knows who God is. Now, they don't know Jesus. They've got to hear his name. But they know who God is. They just suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So we really shouldn't need to go about the business of trying to prove that God exists.
Again, more circular argumentation, more special knowledge pleading, and more appeals to authority and appeals to religion, none of which convinces me. I do not have any knowledge about God, other than knowledge in the sense that I know about different gods that I have studied about. Is that what you mean? No, what he is trying to say, I assume, is that I supposedly have knowledge that there is a God, but I suppress that knowledge because the Bible says that I do, and of course the Bible's true. But how do we know that? Well, because the Bible is true, right? That's what pre-assumptionalism is, and it doesn't work, and we all know that it doesn't work, which actually that statement itself is circular. But if you're allowed to do it, I'm allowed to do it, right? No? Okay, let's just see what your argument is.
However, if somebody is tender and they genuinely ask, we should be prepared to respond to, hey, you got some proof for God?
Why do they have to be tender? What does that got to do with anything? How do you tell if someone's tender? Do you poke them with a fork? Okay. Enough with the comedy. Let's just examine what he's got.
Lots of people say there's no evidence for God. Well, we're going to knock that one out in 3. I'm just going to have to keep it simple, throw in the old 1-2 combo, get in and out real quick, and let you fine folks chat all about it, okay?
Whoa, slow down there. I didn't even speed that part of your video up. What the bleep's going on? Ah!
Punch one I'm going to call the info uppercut. When's the last time you walked into a library and asked, hey, where are all the books that have been written by mindless products of natural laws? The librarian would probably laugh at you and tell you that no such books exist. They don't exist because they can't exist. Why not? Because first of all, it's just common sense. The words that form the message in books always originate from a person with a brain. Or to say it a bit more scientifically, the message of the book, the purpose, comes to be understood by the orderly placement of the words, design, and information. Information. Now, anytime we find info, these basic laws always apply. Number 1, matter doesn't spontaneously produce information. Number 2, only a mental source, intelligence, can generate new creative information. In other words, just like those books that couldn't originate without a mind, neither could life. Why not, you ask? Because we know that DNA contains information. Therefore, the laws of information science apply, which means the information in DNA couldn't have spontaneously generated, and that a mind is behind the information. Period. No exception.
So, no, all of this is based on the false analogy / equivocation of information, and the false analogy that DNA is like a book. It's not. Books are not self-replicating. DNA is. This is a blatant misrepresentation of what DNA is. The information that DNA has is documented very much online as well as in books. If one is going to make a video argumentation with this word in it, or they're going to make a written argumentation, they should do minimal research, if not extensive research, on what it is. If you're unwilling or unable to do that, then you really shouldn't make an argumentation, because you're going to commit one of 2 fallacies: an argument of ignorance or an outright lie. Since you looked it up and ignored what the actual definition is, you just went on and did it anyways. I'm not sure which the case is here, but the equivocation still stands, because we know what the real definition is, and we're going to look up the actual research of it, and we're going to acknowledge that this is wrong. And whether it's wrong because they're ignorant on the matter, or if they're deliberately lying to us, is irrelevant to the matter. They are wrong. And we can't address which one of those potential logical fallacies they might have committed on top of these other fallacies. But it's certainly possibly there. We can give it a tentative +1 to our logical fallacy counter here, which is unusual, but I think in this case is absolutely warranted.
Look at it this way. The simplest life form we know of is an amoeba, and it contains as much information in its DNA as 1,000 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. So, are we to believe that there's no way a message in a library book could spontaneously generate, but far more complicated messages in DNA that contain 1,000 times more information could have?
The modern day amoeba is far more different than the ancient amoeba would have been. And the ancient amoeba would have contained far less information than the modern day amoeba. That's kind of important information that is being left out here. It might be true that the modern amoeba has information that is equivalent to rows of encyclopedias. DNA contains a lot of coding, a lot of information. That's the word that we've decided to use. It doesn't mean the same thing as it does in other places. This is where equivocation comes in. This is where it's very important when you're dealing with natural language to define the terms that you're using. And if you're making an argument out of ignorance or just blatantly lying to your audience, you're ignoring the actual terminology of what DNA's information really is contrasted to what you're trying to represent it as. And we know that this is a fallacy already, but we're just going to keep repeating the same fallacies over and over again in order to make our point, which is not a good point because it's not based on anything real. So the law of information that the video is proposing that proves God is not a law at all, because the law is based upon either lies or ignorance. In either case, it is based on a logical fallacy. And even if there was a law or rule of information that was not logically incoherent, a logical fact, something that you can be sure about, something you don't have to be skeptical of, is not evidence for anything at all. So even if you said, I found this logically coherent rule, and I want to use this to prove, nope, you're already wrong. You cannot use it to prove anything. All you can do is use it to show if something is logically coherent or we should be skeptical of something. You cannot use logic or an argumentation to prove anything, ever.
Not likely. You see, when it comes to life or anything else that contains information, the laws of information science confirm the necessity of a creative mind.
Okay, so let's just ignore all the logical fallacies so far. Why not? The conclusion would have to warrant the question, who created the mind that created everything else? This law either applies to everything or it applies to nothing. You can't have special pleading here. There's just no room for it in this particular argumentation. So that means God has to be created by something else that also has a mind. And that mind has to be created by a mind, and so forth and so on, because the laws of information always apply.
And guess what? In the very first book of the Bible, it just happens to mention that. In the beginning, God created. Bam! Uppercut lands on the cheek.
Guess what? In my informal logic book, it just happens to say no. It says that somewhere on some page, and I'm taking it out of context, but it says the word no in that book, so that proves everything, doesn't it? No? No, that's not how things work? Really? But it's from a book that I can trust. It's a scientific sort of book, written by an expert. What do you mean I can't use that for an argument?
And now here comes the indefensible head blow. We'll call this the not a big bang bing swing, the KO to the claim that there's no evidence of God, the law of causality, left hook of doom. It goes like this. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. Now, either something caused the universe to come into existence, or nothing caused it. I might not be the smartest guy behind the telescope, but honest, practical, everyday think it's going to lead me to the former. You have to work pretty hard to conjure up a way that nothing did it.
The Kalam cosmological argument, which is what this is, uses a very strong word when it says the word everything. In argumentation, one must be able to provide proof if they use the word everything or the word nothing and other strong words like all or none. It's easier to use words like often or most or seldom or things like that because the support that you have to give is far less. It's a weaker sort of support that you can go for. But when you're saying everything, you have to be able to show that everything does do this thing. And here you're referring to the entire universe, which is something that we don't know every single thing about. There could be something that is a beginning, but has no cause. There could be something that began from nothing. There could be something that began from an infinite regress of beginnings. There's a lot of could-be's. We don't know. We can't speak to the could-be's. We can only speak to what we have observed. And this is really where the intuition sort of tries to wedge itself into logic here and say, oh, but doesn't it make sense that things have a cause? Isn't that sensical? Doesn't that make more sense to you? And it doesn't matter if it makes sense to me or not. That's not a logically coherent way to get to a conclusion. Reality often doesn't make sense to us, but it's still reality. And we have to be willing to get the data on reality, look at the data as objectively as possible, and then make a decision based on what we have in front of us, as well as what we have accumulated over time, to make some sort of theory about how things are. We can't just get to the end of that by saying, well, this makes the most sense to me, so I'm going to use that. It just doesn't work that way. There's also equivocation in the Kalam because the universe is not a thing. Everything begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, but the universe is not a thing at all. It doesn't fit the category of thing. So it's false on that point as well.
It's pretty improbable, nigh impossible, to account for design, information, and cause if the universe just exploded from nothing.
There's two problems with this. First of all, it is within theology coherent to say that God created the universe from or out of nothing, which means that your whole argumentation fails on a theological level as well as a logical one. Because if all you have is God, then what did God use to create the universe? Well, his will, or the force of his desire, or magic, or just, he snapped his fingers. But okay, fine, but what was there besides God that God could have used to make the universe out of? If you're willing to say that God used itself, then I don't think you're doing Christian theology anymore. So God creating the universe from nothing or out of nothing is more in line with Christian theology than saying, no, nothing can come from nothing. You have to have God in order to have the universe. Okay, fine. You have God. Where did the universe come from? You can't just say, well, it came from God, but what did God use to create the universe? If there's nothing there, then God used nothing to create the universe. So what is this argument? This argument is failing to do what it's trying to do, which is say that you can't have nothing cause nothing. You have to have God in order to cause something. But then the argument needs to say that only God can cause something to come from nothing. And that if you have nothing, then you can't have nothing cause nothing to create something. The argument doesn't do that, though. That's what the argument's trying to do. The argument would be wrong on the second point, that nothing might have caused the universe. And in fact, there's a book by Lawrence Krauss called A Universe from Nothing, where he suggests that, yes, a universe might indeed come from nothing. It is a possibility within the realm of physics. But that's in line with Christian theology as well. One could just simply assert that God used the nothing to create the universe. But not if one is using the Kalam cosmological argument. They can no longer make this claim, because the Kalam actually contradicts the idea that something can come from nothing. And if God has nothing to work with, then God can't make the universe. Oops! Kind of a problem for the Kalam. As a former theist, I abandoned the Kalam when I understood logic. I hadn't yet to abandon God, but I abandoned the Kalam long before I deconverted, because it just doesn't work on any level, not even a theological one. So this video is far from being done as far as analysis of it. There's more to do, but I'm almost at the 20-minute mark, and I've kept you all for far too long already. We have 34 logical fallacies. If anyone wants a part 2, I will gladly provide that for them, but I think I need to end now. Unless and until you have a logically coherent argument, we must continue to be skeptical of your claims.